speaking to you from beautiful Philadelphia. If you're interested in writing fiction, chances are that you have come up with one or a few great story ideas. And the real adventure starts when you learn to uncover these great stories, these great story ideas, and realize what you're really working with. And it's like being an archaeologist who first discovers a fossil. They know they have one, but they don't know the true shape of it. It could be as big as a comb. It could be as big as a car. When we get story ideas, most of the time we know we've got one, but we're not sure exactly what we're working with at first. How do we uncover what we've really got? How do we recognize that great story idea so that we could turn it into the great story it can be? I have an example. Today's example is Martian Chronicles. It's by Ray Bradbury. Not the book, but in 1980 they put out a mini-series, and I'll put a link below. Please watch it. You'll get a lot more out of this video. And it's the first link in the messages right below. And just you can watch the whole, you can watch all 3 parts. They're all free online, but for the sake of this video, please just watch that first part, and we can use it, and I can use it to convey to you how to uncover great story ideas. When you watch it, if you've never seen it before, please keep in mind it's dated, it's cheesy, it's lo-fi, it's pre-CGI, but please keep in mind, in fact, that works for the video I'm making, because hidden in that cheesiness is a great story idea. From this point on, I will assume that you have very recently watched part 1 of the 3-part mini-series Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. Normally with my writing videos, I don't play the critic, but I would like to talk a little bit about what I see in teachings, tutorials, how-tos on fiction writing. And a problem I have with many of them is that, okay, a lot of them do talk about very important things. These are the plot, the climax, the 3-act play, Chekhov's gun, which is basically if something is going to get used, people should know that it's there. These are all, it's great to learn all of this, and there is a big problem with focusing too much on this. Basically, they are all the ways that stories are the same. The unspoken message on these teachings on how to write is that if you follow this structure, it worked in a majority of other stories, and therefore it should work in yours. And that just isn't the case. I'm not saying it isn't important to learn all these, but be aware. But there's a problem here. A story is something new. A story is a way of conveying a new insight, a new idea. And if you get caught up in how stories have worked for the same reasons across the centuries, it's missing the point. One thing this approach to teaching fiction writing does is it has us look at the great stories. The problem is that it has us look at them in terms of how they're just like a majority of other stories out there. And so we become blind to the true greatness of these stories. The reason they're great are because of their unique qualities, because of the things that make them absolutely different from all the stories that have ever been told. If you take 100 fiction writing classes, here is one thing you will be taught, and that is conflict. That a story needs conflict. And yes, that is true. And go ahead and define the conflict. It could be man versus man. It could be man versus nature. It could be man versus God. Man versus self. These are the different conflicts. And this is a great reduction of a majority of all the stories that have ever been told into their sameness, the way they are as much alike with each other as you could possibly view stories. In Western Hemisphere societies, this idea of conflict it's a very Western Hemisphere outlook. It's dualistic. It's good versus bad, good versus evil, wrong versus right. These are two forces that are opposing and in no way linked to each other. Whereas, me personally, I find it more helpful to story creation to look at it more in an Eastern Hemisphere outlook. That is yin and yang. That is equal opposites that mutually support each other. You know, it's like night and day. It's like hot and cold. A lot of things happen on this earth because of hot and cold and the way they interact with each other and the constant going back and forth between hot and cold. And this idea that, you know, the idea of evil is basically like things are evil just because they are. There's no reason behind it. It's you know, everything is done for a reason. And the reasons are often very much the same for acts that are described as evil as acts that are described as good. People do good things to improve their own lives and the lives of people they care about and their environment. And that's exactly the same reason that things that are described as evil are done. And yes, there is selfishness, there is greed, there is corruption, and in those power structures, it's often very much the same needs, intentions, goals as in benevolence, as in, you know, a group organizing to raise the wage to a living wage. In terms of the whole, everyone getting together to build that bridge so that all of a sudden it's so much easier to get to the town where everyone can sell their goods. So in the yin-yang attitude towards storytelling, it's about the dynamics of power. It's not so much man versus man or man versus self. It's about these two power structures and how they interact with each other and how they change each other. And I'm not talking about not describing anything as being wrong. I'm talking about a less simplistic way of looking at what causes interesting stories. Back to the opening question, how do we recognize when we have a great story idea? How do we see it more clearly so that we can write that great story? What we do is, it's a brand new thing. We see it as a brand new thing and we try to find its uniqueness. Going back to the example, Martian Chronicles, part 1 of the 3-part mini-series. There is a great story idea hidden in there. Okay, so you have the humans from Earth, and then you have the Martians. Now let's look at this. The Martians are a weaker society, and they know this, and they know enough about humans to be frightened. And they fall back on the only power they have, which is telepathy and creating illusions in the world of the invaders. We get a better understanding of the power dynamic here. It isn't just man versus Martian. It's one power has certain advantages and needs and intentions, and the other one does also. A big factor here is that the Martians have a weakness. They are not a warring society. They are not prepared to deal with invasions from humans. So what happens at the heart of this great story is that you have these humans who go over and easily take over Mars, but what happens is that they find themselves in an environment they are not at all prepared to deal with. This is an environment where once they get all settled in, all of a sudden dreams become a part of reality. And this is so different from what humans are used to dealing with that it catches them on the side. They have no way of preparing or knowing what happens. And this is a fascinating story. And think just a minute how that makes it such an original and different story from name another movie. Blade Runner. Very completely different plot, completely different power dynamics. I'm not saying ignore plot, I'm not saying ignore the hero's journey, I'm not saying ignore good guy, bad guy outlook. I'm saying look for what makes the story truly unique. In terms of having conquered Mars, it seems like it's been done, but the enemy, the Martians, are still there and in a mysterious way. We aren't sure exactly how they are, if, or we don't even know if they're still around. It's very, they go to Mars and, spoiler alert, they find that the Martians have died. But the way the story is told, we aren't sure, is that just one of their illusions? We don't know for sure. I think of one of my favorite learnings about history, and that is in that World War II, when the Germans were invading all different countries. What happened when they invaded Russia? Russia is so huge, they invaded Russia and they conquered it, and not the entirety of the country. They conquered the territory. They easily won that territory. Russia's so huge, and this was during the winter. It was freezing cold, and they continued to easily conquer these territories, but it wasn't that Russia was stronger than Germany. It's just that the territory was so vast that it stretched the German troops thin. And the lines that fed those troops brought them more food and supplies, grew thinner and thinner, and stretched further and further. And ultimately, the reason Germany lost in Russia is just because Russia was absorbing them. Think of it like these two microscopic animals, and you have one small, very fight-hungry bacterium that attacks this huge, seemingly carnivore-like bacterium that is so big that it eventually just absorbs the smaller one and ends up winning in the end. It's a very interesting power dynamic, and it's a lot of fun to see this power dynamic play out in a story like Martian Chronicles. I'm not saying that that's where Ray Bradbury got his idea. I'm just saying it's a similar power dynamic. Please, please do not get too critical about early forms of your story ideas. Don't stamp them out. They are not going to come to you fully formed. Allow them to have their quirks. Allow them to arrive to your awareness not fully worked out. You have plenty of time to make the ideas work. But recognize when you see something new, that's what you're looking for. And And then you have something to work on. And most likely, if you're like me, it doesn't work at first, but you continue to look for what value these stories might have. When I watched the first part of Martian Chronicles, I was kind of bored the whole time because it's dated, because there are things, you know, the way astronauts act, it just seems so silly to have, you know, astronauts travel all the way from Mars and they're walking around like they're at a, you know, campsite. But the whole time it helped me to exercise what I need to exercise in writing fiction, and that is to continually try to look for the value of what is there, and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use a cliche. When we're looking for the great story ideas that we can come up with, it's a matter of looking through the fog. It's even though things seem silly, to continue to work with them and see what we can make them into. Even though they may seem cheesy, hey, that is because we just haven't made them convincing enough yet. That is just because we haven't fully recognize their potential and put them together in a way that no one ever thought of before. Watching Martian Chronicles TV series is a great way to learn, to look past the cheesiness, to look past how unconvincing the special effects are, and to try to see through that fog that there is a great story hidden in the heart of it. Go out and find teachings on yin yang and the different power dynamics out there. Learn to play the Tao Te I Ching. These will teach you to become an aficionado for different power dynamics, power struggles, and try to see it everywhere in your daily life. In the weather report, you know, these forces, these storm forces, those are power struggles. The yin-yang concept is basically trying to really understand the nature of power struggles. It isn't simplifying them to good and bad. It is understanding them. Good and bad is an extremely two-dimensional, overly simplified way of looking at life. With yin and yang, you're looking at not just the cause and effect, but the way that there's intention involved, there's motivation, there's need. It's a much more fleshed out 3D model of two power forces struggling. I bet you anything, if you've gotten a story idea and it haunts you at night and it compels you to write it, that there's an original element to it, and it's a matter of finding that. So if you look and just ask yourself, even if your story is in such a form at the time that it's harder to see, ask yourself not so much what you have already, but what it could be if you turned it around and had it work a little bit differently, and try to get at that mysterious element, that original story element that is hidden in there, and may not even be for one story, but by being transformed and used in different ways. It could be the story element for hundreds of stories. Like I told you about Germany and Russia, that power struggle model, you could use that in a school drama, you could use that in any type of story. If you reduce it to a model of power dynamics, it could take on shapes innumerable shapes, become dozens of stories. Every human's got some of these core brewing, ideas that that drive that individual to put them into story form, and go with it. I know for me, I definitely have more or less one, and I won't even call it an idea, but I'm fully aware of it, and it is the machinery that works deep inside the stories I work on. And by appreciating it, I know that I'll still come up with very different stories, each very different from each other, but there is still that one thing, that one nonverbal thing working in each of them. If you have a favorite story and know that it is a favorite story because of something absolutely unique about that story and original, please leave it in a comment so that other viewers can appreciate it. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you want to get me back, please hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. If you want to be amazing at encouraging me to make more of these videos, share by tweeting one of my videos, Facebook, stumbled upon those different ways of sharing YouTube videos. Please take the time and go check out my bizarre alternate reality fiction put in video form, illustrated storytelling at solomation.com about the very strange adventures of my protagonist, Lily. I hope your writing goes great. I hope that you stumble upon mystery and find yourself searching through the fog for that glimmer of what was going to be that new great story, and have a great time doing it. And I hope you have a good day.